I have the privilege of being in conversation with the son of the soil, the irrepressible Justice Malala. Welcome home. Welcome back. We know you haven't quite left. You are visiting the other part of the world, the so-called global north. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me here, Prof. It's lovely to be back. I say to people, where do you find your energy? And you and I off camera earlier were talking about Nigeria, and Lagos is where I find a lot of energy. But when I'm in Joburg and this city just gets me going, I have a million ideas in my head. I want to write 20 books. I want to start new businesses. Yeah. I want to do all these things. So it's so lovely to be here and to be with your institution, which
Absolutely.
Is just fantastic.
So energy is a beautiful word. It can be a force for good. It can also be a destructive force. You and I are going to struggle in this conversation, remaining in this professional space, given our long friendship and history. But let's give it a go. So GIBS, we like to position ourselves, not simply from a position, but because we believe in this, that we want to advance responsible business leadership and management. And I know how important leadership is to you, and I know how important responsible leadership is to you as well. And oftentimes we consider successful examples as places to learn about leadership. But at GIBS, we think it's equally important to reflect on unsuccessful examples. And because you learn from both, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So you are here to talk to us about leadership. Why is leadership so important to you?
Leadership is important to me because, at a personal level, I wish there had been more emphasis in my learning about leadership. And I love what you just said about learning from the visible successes and from the stumbles, the failures, the businesses that go under. I'll tell you a very small anecdote. When I was 32 years old, I was asked to start a newspaper by a Nigerian entrepreneur. I hadn't studied leadership. It was my first major role of leadership. I had been in sort of smaller leadership roles, but this was a big challenge, quite a significant organization. We hired 125 people. We went out to market, and the business imploded spectacularly. We were on the front page of the business press as, the doors of the business had been locked up and the sheriff of the court and so forth. And people interestingly said, "Oh, Justice, don't ask him about what happened at this day because he must be embarrassed, he must be this." But I can tell you now at age 53 that was the most learning moment of my life. I'm still friends with my entrepreneur because he taught me so much, and it taught me so much. Just that experience of pushing and not succeeding.
Yeah.
The lessons from that, I carry them with me all the time, and I use them in leadership lessons, in leadership, in my own way of finding my way in the world. So leadership is something for me that I think breaks businesses, societies, countries. And I think if we studied a bit more, if we learned a bit more from both sides, we would be a much better place, we'd be much better parents even.
Yeah. So you have released a new book called The Plot to Save South Africa. It's an interesting reflection on a point in time, a crucial point in our history. And before maybe we reflect a little bit on some of the leadership insights from this book, as well as others, with the two protagonists being, amongst others, Mandela and de Klerk, I'm curious for you to reflect on the enduring title, The Plot to Save South Africa, because it wasn't just a point in time. There's always been a plot, and there continues to be a plot to save South Africa. So what did you have in mind when you came up with that title?
I wanted to write a book that perhaps you and I and others could hone in on and say, all of us go through crises. Things blow up, whether you're in your spaza shop or you're in your store down the road or you're in any context. And how do you deal with a crisis when it hits you? It could be of any kind. You could be in a major organization and it hits. And the moment I focus on is the murder of Chris Hani, who was the most popular ANC leader after Nelson Mandela in the post-1994 period. And when he is assassinated by a right-wing extremist, the country blows up. Riots break out everywhere. I was a young reporter at the time, and I went out to Soweto. I went out to the scene of the assassination in Boksburg, and the country was blowing up. F.W. de Klerk said, "This is the moment when I thought civil war might break out in South Africa." Nelson Mandela says in Long Walk to Freedom, his biography, that if there's a moment when South Africa was going to explode into war, this was it. So I wanted us to take lessons about this is crisis. This is not just crisis management, but it's leadership at a time, intense time of crisis, and how to weather that storm and come through it. And I think those are the lessons. But the plot to save South Africa is really what the assassins wanted to. They wanted the chaos and the mayhem so that the army would step in and say, F.W. de Klerk, stop the democracy process, stop the negotiations, stop talking to Nelson Mandela. We reset in the country to 1975, to the depths and heights of apartheid rule. And so they believed they were plotting to save South Africa, but that plot would have taken us as a country down a horrific, terrible, war-torn path. But I also played on that title because I wanted to say, many of us think, 30 years down the line, we've sorted out the country, it's all good. But we're always battling to. I think it's an ongoing, and I don't think it stops until this country is really at peace with itself. We are at peace with who we are. We continue to plot to save this country in many ways, in a positive way, unlike the assassins of Chris Hani. Absolutely.
So I regularly get asked to talk about leadership and strategic leaders. And one of the quotes comes out of a book written by Jeff Immelt in 2021 on leadership. And it's interesting, I refer to Jeff Immelt because he was both a successful and a failed leader in one person. And he says, leadership is an intense journey into yourself. And if you're willing to go to bed beaten up and wake up the next morning ready and willing to listen and learn, then I believe you can lead. So let's go into that conversation about what you think about leadership, that as the setup.
I love that quote. It's amazing. It's a part of the, and I don't want to delve into the book too much, and I'm sure your viewers will read it, and I hope they'll draw the lessons. But one of the key things for me is that it's so profound what you said about examples of success versus examples of stumbles. So one of the great things about South Africa was that in that period of crisis, if you ask people my age, you say...
I'm younger than you, dude.
Oh, yeah, okay. You weren't around. But if you ask people my age and you say...
No, I'm just joking. I was there.
Absolutely. But you say, how did South Africa get out of the crisis? People will tell you, Nelson Mandela went on television, gave an incredible, amazing address to the nation, and peace descended upon the country. I wanted to write a book that said, actually, Mandela got the beating up that Immelt talks about is what happened to Nelson Mandela. He actually gave a speech, and the speech was a dud. He arrived late at the studio because he'd been with the Honey family. It didn't work out. And so the speech where Mandela tries to rally the nation doesn't quite do it. Over the next few days, he's criticized, he's booed, and so forth. But he says, we've got to do this again. So 2.5 days later, he sits down and writes the speech that everyone remembers and says he delivered on the day. In fact, he'd been beaten up over the 3 days and arrives at this moment where he says, yes, that didn't work out, but here's what I'm going to do now to rally the nation. And he gives this incredible speech on television to the nation in which he defangs the attempt to blow up the country into civil war. And for me, part of it was to say, Nelson Mandela is a hero of the world, he's an icon. But I wanted to show exactly what you reference with email, that leadership is hard work, that you get beaten up, that you stumble and you fall, and then you pick yourself up and you do the incredible, amazing thing. And maybe not just yourself, with your team, with other people around you. But it's exactly that. And I think it's very easy to glorify, and you may take, whether it's leaders in corporations, in business, in politics, the great leaders, whether we take slices of Mahatma Gandhi's life, we take slices of Winston Churchill during the war, the Second World War. You take Mandela's life in the struggle, and you say, whoa, look at these leaders and how successful they were. But actually, the success is full of all those ups and downs and the beating up and the setbacks and then the success. But we remember, many of us, sit with the success and don't wait for those moments. The Mandela I love and I liked when I was researching the book is the Mandela who had doubt, the Mandela who stumbled, the Mandela who got booed by his own supporters when he said, I want to work with others because either we work together or we inherit a ruin of a country. So I love that quote, and I think it's a quote for the ages. It's apposite, and it's apposite for me because the minute you said it and asked the question, it really brought. I mean, there are many other examples, but that the answers are not always immediate. And
they're not fully packaged for you, ready.
No, they're not. They're not. And so leadership, part of leadership is the hard work of being knocked down and knocked back and coming back from those hard knocks, from the work of leadership. Yeah. Because it's not, as you say, it's not packaged for you.
So it may surprise you that at GIBS, when we teach business, we teach some philosophy. Mm-hmm. We get some of our students to experience some history because we think it's important. Yeah. And there's a very important philosopher who spoke through the Cheshire cat speaking to Alice in Wonderland. This is now Lewis Carroll,
Yeah.
who says, if you don't know where you come from,
Yes.
anywhere will do. And so I think it's really important that maybe we debunk a myth, because here you talk about 9 days, but actually it's not 9 days that you're talking about here. You are providing a humanizing dimension to the protagonists.
Yeah.
There are many. And you go back to the 1930s, you go back to the 1820s, and then you come back into those 9 days. But I wonder if we could talk about the doubt dimension as one of the attributes of the leaders of our time, and then possibly focusing on these historical figures being Mandela and de Klerk. And I wonder if we can do it dispassionately, if it's possible. See them as historical figures as opposed to the people that we grew up knowing in a particular context.
Yes.
Yeah. So let's begin with this word doubt. How did doubt play out in Mandela first, and then how did doubt play out in de Klerk, and how important was doubt in shaping their leadership philosophies?
I think I'll start with Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela grew up in had a very traditional upbringing. He grew up largely in the court of his uncle, who was a chief. Receiving some leadership lessons, if you will. But Mandela was always kind of diffident, if you will, about his leadership. Whether he was a leader or not, he was more of a follower. He gets recruited into the ANC by Walter Sisulu, who says, "Oh, I see something here," and so forth and so forth. And the doubt is there, but over the 1950s and so forth, he gains some confidence, gets elected to, and you see a bit of the doubt lifting. But then there's 27 years incarceration. What I found humanizing about the particular period that I looked at was that when he's told that this terrible deed has been done, he's doubtful about what needs to be done next, but he's very clear about empathy, that the first thing I have to do is go and comfort the parents and the family of Chris Hani while I'm still here in the Eastern Cape. He got the news while he was in Kunu. So he goes there. But the noise in South Africa was, where is Mandela? He needs to address the nation. He needs to be here. He needs to be in Johannesburg and saying something. The leader must say something. And there's this, where's Mandela? You gotta get him here. And he's saying the moment of empathy, 2 hours he spends with Gilbert and Nomaisa Hani, who are the parents of Chris Hani, in which he empathizes. But he's still doubtful about is going to Johannesburg and being the action hero. Mandela will be here, he'll solve it. He's doubtful about that. And I think he goes through a journey with this almost inner turmoil, but he goes back to Mthatha and waits for Bantu Holomisa. And in that moment, he wanted Holomisa with him so that he can have the young leadership that he knows would be most affected by this around him. And finally, he goes to Johannesburg. But what I like about that is that we all think, not all of us, but some of us think, Professor Mthombeni is the leader. He will be decisive and do this right now and solve the problem, and we can all sit back and watch him in action. But all of us have choices in front of us, not just left or right. It's in the world now. It's not a the West and the East. It's a multipolar world. I have to think about India and Russia and the US and Brazil and South Africa and Kenya and Lagos and so forth and so forth. So we have all these choices, and doubt. What I found interesting about Mandela is that the doubt galvanized him to look at all these options and come to a decision. But it wasn't, the way sometimes we like to think of, no, the manual says the hero arrived and solved the problem. And I think that's the value of that journey that he, on that first day of doubt, of how do we go this? And so in part of that doubt, Mandela made numerous phone calls to Walter Sisulu, Ahmed Kathrada, to younger leaders in the ANC at the time, Cyril Ramaphosa, Thabo Mbeki, others. What do we do? How do we do this? And if as a leader you don't listen to those voices asking you, if you don't consider them, a time of decision making will come, but you have to listen to those voices to help yourself listen to others around you and reach a decision or an option that leads you to the next step in whether
so Madiba listens.
He listened.
Doubt was a mechanism to enable him to listen. Do we find a similar characteristic in de Klerk?
De Klerk, in many ways, in the history prior to the particular events I talk about, had been almost conditioned that you are made for leadership. You will rise to the top. His family, his background, his father had been in the cabinet, National Party cabinet before him, and so forth. So he saw
and his uncle was the prime minister,
and so forth. So he saw himself as almost fulfilling a predestined path. This is how it will. And I think in many ways, de Klerk didn't use doubt as a leadership tool. I think to a large extent, it was, this is the decision we've made and this is how we go to it. In many ways, you talk about history. In 1992, in this country, we had a referendum about does de Klerk and his cabinet continue with the reforms that they had started, or do they stop? And it was a yes or no referendum. It was a whites-only referendum. And in many ways, he used that not as a reflection of the doubt, but as a I need a rubber stamp for what I already know. So in response to the matter of Chris Hani, he was very clear that as a leader, he's not the person to lead right at that moment, because as he wrote later on in his life, if I do or say anything, I will just make the situation worse. In this moment, I'm not the leader. The leader is Nelson Mandela. So he stepped back, but over the next few days, and this is where, in my view, doubt can work negatively. In the next day and the days after, the violence intensified, rioting intensified. And his doubt and what had galvanized him to collaborate and reach out and work with Nelson Mandela, his doubt led to him saying, no, it didn't work. This ceding, if you will, of power to Nelson Mandela at this moment is not working, because he wanted an immediate cessation of protest. He wanted people to sit in their homes and not go out and mourn and commemorate and so forth, which was practically impossible at that time. So the doubt then galvanized him to say, no, we need a harder fist. So from an almost sublime collaboration at the beginning of the crisis, you see him then, his doubt almost undermining that collaboration that he'd worked on and led with Nelson Mandela. And that unravels him for the week. It's only afterwards that he says that he pulls back from that doubt, the doubt that had roiled him, and sort of settles and calms down and comes back to the collaboration.